Don't pack your suitcase. I already hit it. Those were the words that abruptly halted Grace as she stood frozen, when she found Ethan curled in the closet, clutching her bag with trembling arms. Her heart broke. He was just a child. But he knew she was contemplating leaving. In that instant, everything shattered. What kind of love compels a child to cling to a suitcase in fear? What kind of choice forces someone to choose between their future and their found family? Stay with us, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about sacrifice, trust, and the courage it takes to love. Grace Morgan had never dared to challenge a billionaire before, but as she stood in the grand living room of the Blake estate, her eyes locked onto Andrew Blake's cold, sharp, dangerous gaze, she knew there was no turning back. "Sir, your son isn't autistic. He just needs love," she said quietly but firmly, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a scalpel. For a moment, only the ticking of Andrew's luxury wristwatch could be heard. Then came the storm. "How dare you," he growled, his voice low and deliberate. "3 dozen specialists say otherwise. You are dismissed. Pack your things and get out of my house." Grace felt the world tilt beneath her. She needed this job desperately. It was her only way to support her grandmother Helen and her younger sister Lily back in Willow Creek. But more than money, what broke her was the thought of leaving Ethan, the little boy who had looked at her that morning with pleading, silent eyes, as Grace knelt to gather Ethan's scattered toys from the marble floor. Her fingers trembled. Her dismissal was humiliating. Yes, but not wrong. What was wrong was witnessing this 4-year-old be treated like a broken machine. Across the room, the therapist responsible for Ethan's emotional outburst stood smugly, tablet in hand. She didn't care, none of them did. To them, Ethan was just a case. Grace was halfway to the door when it happened. "Daddy, don't let Grace go," came a small voice. Everyone froze. Andrew turned slowly, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Ethan stood there, eyes wet, clutching his father's leg. The boy, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in over a year, had just uttered 7 perfect words. The therapist dropped her tablet with a clatter. Grace forgot to breathe for a heartbeat. The mansion fell silent. Andrew knelt, stunned. "Ethan, what did you just say?" Ethan looked up at him with innocent desperation. "I want Grace to stay. She makes the monsters go away." The man who had built empires with logic and crushed competitors with words now had none. Grace, still trembling, knew she had just witnessed a miracle. 2 weeks earlier, she had arrived at Greenwood Hills, stepping out of the cab with her thrift store shoes squeaking against the estate's polished floors. The massive house was intimidating, thick with silence and clinical sterility. Mrs. Hargrove, the estate's longtime housekeeper, eyed her with barely concealed skepticism. The last nanny had left without notice, muttering as she flipped through Grace's resume. "Mr. Blake needs someone qualified. His son is complicated." Grace showed her certification in early childhood education. Ethan had been diagnosed with autism last year. His mother had died in childbirth. "Mr. Blake is very particular," Mrs. Hargrove added. But what she didn't say, and Grace would learn soon enough, was that Mr. Blake ran his home like a boardroom, efficient, silent, utterly devoid of warmth. The first time Grace saw Ethan, he was sitting alone in the garden, lining up toy cars in perfect rows, while a white-coated therapist observed from a distance. She wasn't speaking to him, not touching him, just watching. Something about his loneliness pierced Grace deeply. It reminded her of herself after her parents' death, staring out a window, too young to grieve properly, too aware to feel safe. When Andrew Blake finally entered, Grace recognized him instantly, not from media photos, but from the emptiness in his eyes. Handsome, powerful, yet emotionally vacant. "Can you start today?" he asked flatly after a brief 30-second interview. "Stick to the therapist's schedule." Don't deviate and don't disturb me while I'm working. Just like that. She was in. Just like that. She understood why the previous nannies had left. In the days that followed, Grace watched the therapist treat Ethan like a puzzle to be solved. Rigid schedules, reward charts, no eye contact, no hugs, no warmth. No one sang to him. No stories read. So Grace quietly broke the rules gently, tenderly, secretly. She sang lullabies from her hometown in North Carolina while bathing him, told silly bedtime stories, held him when he screamed. Instead of managing his behavior, she responded with love. Slowly, Ethan responded, humming along, reaching for her hand, making eye contact, until that fateful therapy session when the specialist pushed him too far, and Ethan's panic screamed out. The therapist asked Grace to call Andrew and let him see Ethan's disruptive behavior. But Grace had reached her limit. She told the truth. Your son doesn't need more routines. He needs to feel loved. And now here they were, Ethan begging his father not to let Grace go. Andrew rose slowly, smoothing his tailored suit. His voice controlled, but his eyes changed. You may stay, he said, but you will follow every medical directive. I want cameras in Ethan's room. I'll be watching. Grace nodded, hiding a flicker of relief in her chest. Andrew turned to the therapist, voice sharp again. I want a full report on what just happened tomorrow morning. Grace knelt beside Ethan, his tiny fingers curling into her sleeve. Thank you for defending me. Champ, she whispered. You're so brave. For the first time, Ethan looked her directly in the eyes. That night, as Grace tucked him into bed, she noticed a tiny red light glowing in the corner of the room, a newly installed camera. She looked into it and smiled. Do you think Grace did the right thing by standing up to Andrew, even if it cost her her job? Grace tried to ignore the small red camera light above Ethan's bed, but every time Ethan smiled, looked her in the eye, or reached for her hand, she felt Andrew Blake watching behind the lens. Still, she didn't let it stop her. She sang softly to Ethan, gently combed his curls after his bath, whispered stories into his ear as he drifted to sleep. The mansion remained cold and silent. Yet inside Ethan's room, something had begun to grow: trust, warmth, and flickers of hope. In the days that followed, Grace carefully balanced. During therapist hours, she obeyed routines, charts, avoided eye contact as instructed. But when the house was quiet, she returned to her instincts. She played music, taught Ethan to hum along, caught him clapping offbeat to silly songs, and it made her cry in the pantry where no one could see. One afternoon, while reorganizing Ethan's closet, she discovered a dusty box of unopened musical toys. Inside, a small plastic flute. She cleaned it and offered it to Ethan after lunch. Want to try? To her amazement, Ethan eagerly grabbed it and blew into it with wild squeaks. You're a natural, she laughed, clapping along to his chaotic notes. That night, she snuck her grandfather's old guitar into the mansion. It wasn't much, but the strings still held their tune. She played softly for Ethan after dinner, sitting beside him on the rug. Mesmerized, he watched her. Would you like to learn? She asked gently. He nodded silently, never taking his eyes off her hands. Unbeknownst to them, Margaret Blake had just returned from her European trip, watching through a half-open doorway with a marble face. The moment she entered, the music stopped. What's going on here? She snapped. These toys weren't part of Ethan's therapy. Grace quickly stood. Good afternoon, Mrs. Blake. We were just... Margaret interrupted. I know what you were doing, interfering with a carefully designed medical plan. Before Grace could defend herself, a voice from behind the hallway wall spoke. I authorized it, Andrew said. He stepped in, hands casually in his pockets, eyes unreadable. He had been watching through cameras. Margaret hissed, "This woman is undermining progress." He cut her off. What progress? Ethan didn't speak a full sentence for over a year. He cried through every session. Now he plays music, talks, smiles. Maybe it's not the routines. Maybe it's love. For the first time, Grace saw Margaret falter, her gaze flicking to Ethan, clutching the flute like a security blanket. "You're making a mistake," she said softly. "Maybe," Andrew replied, "but I'm willing to try." That night, a thunderstorm rolled in. Rain hammered the mansion's windows. Lights flickered twice before stabilizing. Grace was reading in the hallway when a shrill cry echoed from Ethan's room. She rushed in to find him trembling beneath his blanket, eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," she whispered, sitting beside him. "It's just the rain." He crawled into her lap, clutching her shirt. She hummed a soothing lullaby from her childhood, rocking him until his sobs subsided. "Chocolate helps," she whispered. "Want to make some?" Ethan nodded. They tiptoed to the kitchen. Grace prepared cocoa, adding cinnamon, the way her grandmother used to, as they stirred the pot. A sudden cough behind startled her. Andrew stood in the doorway, wearing a robe over pajamas. "Ethan had a nightmare," she explained. "We're making hot chocolate." He hesitated, then sat at the island. "Mind if I join?" Grace blinked, then nodded. "Of course not." They sipped cocoa as thunder rumbled outside, Ethan with a chocolate mustache. For the first time, Andrew laughed, really laughed, watching Ethan. He murmured, "This feels like something we lost a long time ago." A few days later, after persistent nudging from Grace, Andrew agreed to a second medical evaluation for Ethan. The specialist spent hours with the boy, reviewing his history gently. At the end, he sat across from Andrew and Grace, hands folded. "Mr. Blake," he said, "your son doesn't meet the criteria for classic autism. His behavior aligns with selective mutism and trauma-induced attachment issues. He doesn't need medication. What he needs is safe, consistent emotional connection from the right person." Grace held her breath. Andrew said nothing, only watched Ethan play quietly in the corner with a small xylophone. "That right person," the doctor added, "might already be sitting beside you on the car ride back." Silence was heavy. Then Andrew spoke. "Eyes still on the road." "You were right," he said simply. Grace didn't answer. She only looked out the window, heart pounding. That night, as she helped Ethan into bed, he asked softly, "Are you going to stay?" Grace knelt beside him. "Do you want me to?" she whispered. He nodded, whispering, "You make the house less scary." As she closed his door, she found Andrew standing in the hallway. He looked tired, but different, lighter. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "Any of it, parenting, emotions, trusting people. But I'd like to try." Grace wasn't sure what to say. She simply nodded and then walked past him into the quiet. For the first time since arriving at Greenwood Hills, she felt something shifting within that cold mansion's walls. A hint of something real. Only time would tell what it was. What would you do if someone told you love could heal what medicine cannot? Would you believe them or turn away? It happened just before dawn. Grace was quietly folding Ethan's tiny shirts in the nursery when she noticed his small travel bag was missing. Confused, she widened the closet door, only to find Ethan curled in the corner, hugging the missing suitcase to his chest, cheeks damp with tears. "What are you doing here?" "Sweetie," she whispered, kneeling, "I don't want you to leave." Ethan choked out, "I hid your bag. If you can't pack, you won't go." Grace froze. She hadn't told him about the job offer in Asheville, hadn't said a word. Somehow, the child knew, moments later, Andrew appeared in the doorway, eyes widening when he saw his son, clutching the suitcase like a lifeline. Grace stood slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. The three of them looked at each other in aching silence. Some unspoken truth finally laid bare. They were no longer just nanny, father, and child. They were a family on the edge of falling apart. For 3 days, the mansion was wrapped in silence. Grace stayed but barely spoke to Andrew. She spent her time with Ethan, helping him read, playing games, letting him pour pancake batter, listening to his favorite music. The job offer sat untouched in her drawer. She didn't know whether to accept it or fight for something that had never been promised. Then one morning, Andrew called her into the nursery. "Ethan, can you go see Mrs. Harrow for a minute?" he asked softly. The boy hesitated, then nodded and slipped away. Andrew turned to Grace, his expression unreadable. "I'm leaving tonight," he said without preamble. Her heart stopped. "What? I'm going on a trip just for 2 days. There's something I need to do for us. I know I should explain, but I need you to trust me. Please don't make any decisions until I return." And just like that, he was gone. That night, Grace lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She tried to focus on the job offer, the salary, security, distance. But every time she looked at Ethan, curled up beside her with his hand in hers, her heart splintered. The next evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, her phone rang. It was Lily. Grace sobbed through the speaker. "I got it. I got the scholarship. Full ride, tuition, books, housing. I'm going to be a doctor." Tears filled her eyes. Years of working herself to the limit to keep Lily's dreams alive. Finally, they were real. She no longer had to sacrifice her heart for financial survival. That night, as she passed the hallway, she saw a figure waiting in the shadows. It was Margaret Blake. "I'd like a word," she said coolly. Grace followed her to the study. There, Margaret poured 2 glasses of wine. "I've been watching," she said. "Lucas, Ethan is brighter and happier. That's because of you," Grace said, unsure if it was gratitude or something darker. Margaret continued, "I also know about your offer, and I won't stop you if you take it. In fact, I've arranged another, higher pay, at one of the best private schools in the country, far from here." Grace blinked. "You're trying to buy me out?" she asked. "I'm giving you an exit before things get messy, before hearts break." Grace rose slowly, her voice steady. "I didn't come here looking for heartbreak, Mrs. Blake. I came for a job. But I found something else, your son, your grandson, a home. I won't walk away from that just because it's inconvenient." She left the study, her pulse pounding, without seeing the soft look Margaret gave her. 2 days later, just before sunrise, the front gates opened. Andrew had returned, but instead of entering through the main doors, he waited by the garden steps, holding something wrapped in cloth. Grace was stepping outside when she saw him. "I went to Willow Creek," he said simply, "to see your grandmother. She told me a story about a man who gave up his inheritance to the woman he loved, about building a life brick by brick, between 2 very different worlds. Inside the cloth were architectural drawings. I sold the mansion," he said, "bought a piece of land between here and Willow Creek. We're building a new home, something that belongs to all of us. And I want you to help me build it, not just a house, but everything." Her breath caught. "There's more," she asked. "I started a foundation for children like Ethan based on what you taught me, the Blake Morgan Center for Child Development." Tears spilled down her face. "Will you run it with me?" he whispered. "Only if you stay." He added, "Not as an employee, not as a guest, but as my partner in everything." Then he knelt. "Grace Morgan, will you build a life with me?" Behind him, Ethan peeked from the doorway, holding the toy flute she had given him that first week. He blew a wobbly note and whispered, "Say yes." Grace laughed through her tears. Yes, yes to everything. Months passed. The new house rose like a promise from the ground. Ethan's laughter echoed through halls, still under construction. One spring afternoon, under the jacaranda tree, Andrew had insisted on transplanting from the old mansion. Grace, Andrew, and Ethan sat together, drawing plans in the dirt for their future. They didn't need the world's approval. They had chosen each other. It all began the day Grace looked into a powerful man's eyes and dared to say, "Your son doesn't need a diagnosis. He just needs love." And love was exactly what they lived. Loud, messy, imperfect, but real. What about you? Did this story move your heart? Type 100 in the comments if you believe love can change everything. Share where you're watching from. And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a little hope. Let me know if you like further adjustments.